Fire pops low in the stove. Heat crawls back into old bones. When winter sets in, the leg reminds me of places I don't talk about. Brothers, leaving the battlefield doesn't mean the war is over. Sometimes the quiet is just a disguise. Silence can be louder than gunfire. I thought I'd found a safe zone, a small town diner. Coffee hot, back against the wall. Me holding the line, while the ghosts of the past stayed outside. But monsters don't wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk in laughing, thinking rules don't apply, thinking boundaries are optional. So let me ask you this, brothers. When you're pushed into a corner, do you run or do you stand and protect what matters? That night, it was just a limping man, a service dog doing its job, and one bad decision that crossed the line. Sit down with me. Hear what happened next. There's a survival lesson here every man should know. The price of a sneer. Spokane, Washington lay under a wet winter sky. Cold rain drifted sideways through the parking lights, turning asphalt into black glass and making every breath look like it had weight. Daniel Hartman moved through that weather the way he moved through most things. Quiet, measured, as if the world was loud enough without him adding to it. He was 40, tall and broad-shouldered, built like someone who used to carry heavy gear for long distances, and still could if he had to. A red and black flannel shirt sat under a faded jacket, the colors plain and familiar against the gray day. His beard was trimmed close, dark, with silver at the temples. He walked with a slight hitch in his left leg, not dramatic, not attention-seeking, just the kind of limp that told the truth about old damage. At his side, a German shepherd matched his pace with calm discipline. Atlas was 5, black and tan, powerful without being reckless. The dog wore a black harness with white block letters that didn't ask for permission. Service dog, do not pet. Most people saw the sign. Most people understood it. Atlas understood everything else. Daniel's job was simple on paper. Night security for a medical logistics warehouse near Northridge Medical Center. Guard the shipments. Check the locks. Keep strangers out. Make sure no one got hurt. It was steady work. It paid enough. It let him keep his head down. That last part mattered more than money. Some mornings, though, Daniel had to cross the hospital lot to sign off on inventory transfers. Those mornings were worse, not because of the weather, but because the hospital belonged to a world that didn't make room for men like him. The private wing of Northridge rose above the parking levels like a polished promise. Glass, steel, soft lighting in the lobby that made even bad news look expensive. Daniel had been inside once, long ago, and the memory still felt wrong, like boots on a clean carpet. He and Atlas passed a row of black SUVs parked near the private entrance. One of them sat idling, heat curling from the exhaust. A man stood beside it, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders squared, as if the air owed him respect. He was in his late 30s, well-fed in a careful way, with hair cut tight and neat. His face was clean-shaven, bright under the lights. A tailored suit hugged his frame like armor. There was a watch on his wrist that could have paid Daniel's rent for months. His eyes were sharp, but not warm. Ethan Cole. Daniel knew the name the way a worker knows the name of the person who can ruin a week with one email. Ethan was the hospital's financial officer, the kind of man who never carried anything heavier than a briefcase, but still acted like he was the one holding up the building. Ethan turned mid-call and saw them. At first, his expression was nothing. Then it tightened into annoyance, as if Daniel and Atlas were a stain the rain had dragged in. He covered the phone's mic with 2 fingers. "Hey," he snapped, voice cutting through the drizzle. "You can't stand there." Daniel stopped, not because Ethan had authority over him, but because stopping was the safer choice. He kept his hands relaxed, palms visible. Atlas stayed at heel, head level, ears forward. "This is employee parking," Daniel said. His voice was low and even, He didn't argue. He stated facts the way he used to read maps. Ethan let out a short laugh, the kind that meant he'd already decided what he thought. Employee parking doesn't mean you get to block the private entrance. Daniel glanced around. They weren't blocking anything. There was a wide lane open. Ethan's annoyance wasn't about space. It was about presence. Daniel felt the familiar pinch in his chest, a quiet old thing he carried like shrapnel. He could swallow it. He always did. "We'll move along," Daniel said. Atlas shifted his weight slightly. Pause, silent on the wet pavement. The dog's eyes flicked once toward the hospital doors, then back to Daniel. Alert, but steady. Ethan noticed the harness. His gaze snagged on the words, "Service dog. Do not pet." His mouth twisted. "Service dog," he repeated, like it was a punchline. His tone softened into something worse than yelling. "Sure." Daniel kept his eyes on Ethan's face, not the watch, not the suit. He had learned long ago that looking at a man's things was an invitation for that man to treat you like less. Atlas inhaled, deep and slow. His nose lifted for half a second, as if tasting the air. Daniel saw it. The change, the dog's attention tightening, not on Ethan, but on the building beyond him. Daniel's pulse ticked up, barely. Old instincts, quiet as a shadow. Ethan turned back to his call, waving them away with a flick of his hand. "I don't have time for this," he said into the phone, loud enough for Daniel to hear. Some security guy and his dog are loitering like it's their driveway. Daniel's jaw tightened. Not anger. Exactly. Something colder. The part of him that remembered being talked about like furniture. He could walk away. He should walk away. That was the rule. Keep moving. Don't give people a reason to notice you more than they already do. Atlas's head turned again, this time toward the service corridor that ran behind the private wing. The dog's posture was still controlled, but there was tension in his shoulders now, like a coiled spring held down by training. Daniel followed Atlas's gaze and saw a maintenance cart being pushed through a side door, its wheels squeaking faintly. Two workers in gray uniforms moved fast, heads down. One of them wore thick gloves, nothing unusual, and yet Atlas was telling him something. Daniel felt the tug of two lives inside him. The man who wanted peace. The man who had once lived by noticing what others missed. The man who had learned the hard way. What happens when you ignore a warning because it's inconvenient? Ethan ended his call and slipped the phone into his coat pocket. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he studied Daniel's limp. The look wasn't curiosity, it was judgment. Like Ethan was measuring Daniel's worth by the way he walked. "Listen," Ethan said, voice low and sharp. "Keep your dog away from my vehicle, and don't stand around staring at the building like you own it." Daniel felt heat rise behind his ribs. He let it pass. He looked down at Atlas, then back at Ethan. "Atlas doesn't go near anyone's vehicle," Daniel said. "He's working." Ethan scoffed. "Working," he repeated again, and shook his head like he was tired of other people's stories. He glanced at a metal water bowl near the curb, one Daniel had set down for Atlas when they'd started their shift. With a careless motion, Ethan nudged it with the toe of his polished shoe. The bowl skidded across the wet pavement, splashing water into the gutter. Atlas did not lunge, did not bark. He only stared at Ethan with a stillness that felt like a warning delivered in silence. Daniel's breath caught for a moment. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Not because of the water, not even because of the insult, because he knew what kind of man kicked a bowl just to prove he could. And because Atlas, the dog who rarely misread anything, was watching the hospital doors like something inside was already wrong. Daniel forced his fingers open. He picked up the bowl, set it upright, and clipped the leash shorter. Ethan turned away, satisfied in the way small men were satisfied after doing small things. He climbed into his SUV without another glance, door shutting with a heavy, expensive thud. Daniel stood in the rain for a second longer than he meant to. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself this was just another morning, Another rich man with sharp words and soft hands. Another reminder to stay in his lane. But Atlas's posture did not relax. The dog's eyes stayed on the building. Daniel swallowed, feeling that old instinct press against his ribs again, insisting. Something is off. He didn't know what it was yet, only that it was real. Only that the people inside that glass and steel palace were not paying attention. Daniel turned and started walking toward the warehouse. Atlas fell into step. Behind them, the private wing lights glowed warm and steady through the rain, as if nothing in that place could ever go wrong. Daniel had seen enough life to know that was exactly when things went wrong. Warnings don't knock twice. By late afternoon, the rain thinned into a cold mist. Low clouds pressed down on Spokane, flattening sound and color, turning the hospital complex into a blur of glass and dim light. Daniel Hartman crossed the service road with Atlas at his side, boots steady on damp concrete. The red and black flannel showed beneath his jacket when the wind shifted, a familiar pattern that felt like armor even when it wasn't. His left leg dragged just a touch more than usual. Cold always made old injuries speak up. Atlas felt it before Daniel did. The dog slowed, head lowering, nostrils flaring. His stride shortened, shoulders tightening beneath the black harness marked "Service dog, do not pet." No barking, no drama, just a sudden, deliberate resistance, as if an invisible line had been drawn across the road. Daniel stopped. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. Not as a question, but a check-in. His voice stayed calm. Atlas lifted his head and stared toward the rear of Northridge Medical Center, where the service corridor cut between the main building and the waste processing unit. A delivery truck idled there, boxy and white, its engine rattling unevenly. Two workers unloaded sealed containers onto a rolling platform. Both wore gray coveralls and thick gloves. One of them laughed at something the other said, the sound thin and sharp in the damp air. Daniel felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear. Focus. He knew that smell. It wasn't strong. Most people wouldn't notice it at all. A faint chemical edge riding the moisture in the air. Clean, but wrong. Daniel had learned to recognize it years ago in places where mistakes were measured in seconds and body counts. Atlas's ears flicked. The dog took one half step forward, then stopped himself, training holding him in place. Daniel studied the scene, letting the world slow down the way it used to when things went bad. The truck's rear door stood open longer than necessary. The containers weren't marked the way they should have been. One lid sat a fraction of an inch crooked. He didn't like any of it. Daniel turned away from the road and walked toward the security office attached to the warehouse. Atlas followed, but not without glancing back once more. Eyes fixed on the service corridor like he was memorizing it. Inside, the office smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. A woman sat behind the desk, mid-40s. Hair pulled into a tight bun, glasses perched low on her nose. Her nameplate read Laura Bennett, facilities manager. Laura looked up, lips thinning as she took in Daniel and Atlas. She was efficient, controlled, the kind of person who liked clean lines and predictable outcomes. "Yes," she said, not unkindly, but not welcoming either. "Can I help you?" Daniel stood straight, hands loose at his sides. "There's a delivery at the rear service corridor," he said. "Something's off. I think you should have it checked before it goes any further." Laura's pen paused above her clipboard. Off how? Daniel chose his words carefully. He had learned the hard way that sounding unsure made people stop listening. Containers aren't sealed right. There's a chemical smell that doesn't belong near patient areas. Laura glanced past him toward the window, then back. "Those are regulated waste units, cleared by procurement." "My dog reacted," Daniel said. He gestured down. Atlas sat perfectly still, eyes alert. "He's trained to detect environmental threats." Laura exhaled through her nose. "Mr. Hartman, I appreciate your concern, but this is outside your scope." Daniel felt the first edge of frustration cut through his calm. He kept his voice level. It becomes my scope when it risks people. Before Laura could respond, the office door opened again. Ethan Cole stepped inside, suit jacket draped over one arm, phone already in his hand. He looked irritated, like the building itself had inconvenienced him. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, eyes flicking from Daniel to Laura to Atlas. Laura straightened. "Just a minor concern about a delivery," she said. "I was explaining that it's been approved." Ethan's gaze settled on Daniel, recognition flashing there, followed by annoyance. "You again." Daniel met his eyes without flinching. "There's a problem in the service corridor," he said. "You should halt the transfer until it's inspected." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "Let me guess. Your dog told you." Atlas's ears twitched, but he stayed seated. Daniel felt something hot rise behind his ribs. He pressed it down. "I'm telling you because I've seen this kind of thing go wrong." Ethan stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could smell expensive cologne over the stale coffee. "What you've seen isn't relevant here. This is a private hospital. We have procedures, and those procedures include listening to warnings," Daniel said. Ethan's eyes hardened. "Those procedures include not panicking because a guard and his pet feel uncomfortable." Laura shifted, uneasy. "Ethan, maybe we should, at least." "No." Ethan cut in. His voice stayed smooth, but the edge was sharp. "We are not delaying operations because someone with no medical or financial authority has a bad feeling." Daniel glanced down at Atlas. The dog's gaze hadn't left the door. "This isn't about feelings," Daniel said quietly. "It's about risk." Ethan turned away, already done with the conversation. "I don't have time for this," he said. "And I don't want you or that dog near the technical areas again. Is that clear?" The words landed heavy, not loud, final. Daniel felt the weight of them settle. He thought of the maintenance cart, the crooked lid, Atlas's tension. He thought of how often warnings were ignored because they came from the wrong mouth. "It's clear," Daniel said. Ethan paused at the door and looked back once more, eyes drifting to Daniel's limp. "Do your job," he said, "and leave the important decisions to people who understand them." The door closed behind him. Silence followed. Laura avoided Daniel's eyes. "I'll note your concern," she said, already writing something vague and harmless on her clipboard. "But unless there's an incident, there's nothing else to do." Daniel nodded. He knew when a door was shut. Outside, the mist thickened. The delivery truck pulled away, rolling deeper into the hospital complex. Atlas watched it go, muscles tight, tail still. Daniel felt the old, familiar conflict tear at him again. Walk away. That was always the safe choice. He had a job, a routine, a life that stayed intact as long as he didn't push. But he also had a responsibility he couldn't explain in policy language. He knelt and rested a hand briefly on Atlas's shoulder. The dog leaned into the touch, steadying them both. "All right," Daniel said under his breath. "We've done what we can." The words tasted false, even as he said them, as they turned back toward the warehouse. Daniel looked once more at the hospital's private wing. Lights glowed softly behind the glass. Everything looked calm, controlled, safe. He knew better. Warnings didn't knock twice. The bill comes due. Night fell fast over Spokane. Rain turned colder, sharper, rattling against glass as wind pushed low clouds over the hospital like a closing fist. Daniel Hartman stood beneath a flickering security light near the warehouse entrance, red and black flannel visible beneath his jacket. Atlas sat at heel, black harness stark against his fur. "Service dog. Do not pet." Catching the light each time the dog shifted, Daniel's left leg ached now. The kind of ache that came when weather and memory agreed to speak at the same time. He told himself to focus on routine. Check the perimeter, log the time, do the job. Atlas did not settle. The dog's head lifted, ears angled forward. His breathing slowed, then held. Daniel felt it before he understood it, a tightening behind the eyes, the sense that the air itself had changed. Then the first alarm sounded. It was distant, muffled by walls and rain, but unmistakable once you knew it. A short, Sharp tone from the hospital side. Another followed, louder this time, joined by hurried footsteps echoing across concrete. Daniel turned toward Northridge Medical Center. The private wing glowed brighter than before, lights flaring as if someone had flipped a switch meant for emergencies only. Atlas rose without command. "Easy," Daniel murmured, though his own pulse had picked up. He clipped the leash shorter and started moving toward the service road, limp, forgotten in the urgency of the moment. A nurse burst through the side doors, white coat flapping, hair pulled loose from its tie. She was young, early 30s, face pale and tight with fear. She didn't see Daniel at first, only the open air she seemed to need. "ICU," she said into a radio clutched in her hand. "We're losing her." Daniel stopped cold. Her. The word landed heavy. He didn't need details to know which room she meant. The private wing. The newborn floor. The place Atlas had watched like a loaded spring. More staff followed. A man in scrubs pushed past, jaw clenched, hands shaking despite his effort to steady them. Another nurse stumbled, caught herself on the door frame, then ran again. Atlas let out a low sound, not a bark, more a vibration in his chest. His eyes locked on the service corridor. Daniel felt the warning flare into certainty. He moved faster, boots splashing through shallow puddles as he approached the corridor entrance. The delivery truck from earlier was gone, but the air still carried that faint chemical edge, sharper now that the wind had shifted. Daniel's stomach dropped. Inside the hospital, chaos had replaced control. The corridor outside the neonatal ICU swarmed with people. Doctors in scrubs moved fast, voices overlapping. Equipment carts rattled. Someone shouted for respiratory support. Someone else cursed under their breath. At the center of it all stood Ethan Cole. The man who had dismissed him hours earlier looked smaller now. His suit jacket was gone, shirt wrinkled, tie loosened. His face had lost its polish, eyes wide and glassy as he stared through the ICU window. Inside, a tiny form lay surrounded by machines. Daniel slowed, instinctively staying back. He didn't belong here. He knew that. The rules had been made clear. Atlas pulled once on the leash, firm but controlled, drawing Daniel's attention to the ventilation panel near the ceiling. A faint hum came from it, uneven, struggling. Daniel's mind raced. Airflow, exposure, low doses over time. He had seen it before, in places no one talked about afterward. A man stepped into the hallway, tall, late 40s, hair graying at the temples, eyes sharp behind thin-framed glasses. He wore a white coat with authority in every crease. Doctor Michael Reeves, the head neonatologist. Daniel recognized him from a distance, from the way others deferred. "Doctor." Reeves spoke quickly to the staff. "We're seeing acute respiratory distress with no clear cause. Labs are inconclusive. Oxygen isn't stabilizing." Ethan grabbed the doctor's arm. "Fix it," he snapped, the word breaking around the edges. "Whatever it takes. I don't care what it costs." "Doctor." Reeves shook his head once. "We're doing everything we can." Daniel watched Ethan's face crumble, inch by inch. The man who had kicked a water bowl to make a point now looked like he would trade anything to take a moment back. Instant regret. It didn't announce itself. It just arrived. Atlas strained again, gaze fixed on the vent. Daniel stepped forward before he could talk himself out of it. "Doctor," he said, voice low but steady. Several heads turned. "Doctor." Reeves frowned. "Who are you?" "Security," Daniel replied. He gestured toward Atlas. "My dog detected a chemical anomaly earlier today near the service corridor. The ventilation system pulls from there." Ethan turned sharply. Recognition flared, followed by disbelief. "This is not the time," he said. "Get him out of here." Daniel held his ground, heart pounding. "It is the time. You dismissed it earlier." "Doctor." Reeves hesitated. He looked at Atlas. Really looked. This time. The dog sat rigid, eyes never leaving the vent. What kind of anomaly? the doctor asked. Daniel chose his words with care. Low-level chemical exposure. Enough to affect a newborn. Not enough to trigger standard alarms. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Doctor. Reeves turned to a nurse. Shut down that vent. Now. Switch to isolated airflow. The nurse ran. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. His hands shook as he pressed them together, knuckles whitening. The arrogance was gone. What remained was terror. The vent hummed, then fell silent. Moments passed that felt like hours. Inside the ICU, monitors beeped. Frantic, then steadier. A nurse leaned over the incubator, voice urgent but hopeful. She's responding, someone said. Oxygen's climbing. Ethan sagged against the wall, a sound tearing out of him that was half sob, half prayer. Daniel exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Atlas finally relaxed. Just a fraction, tension easing from his shoulders. Doctor. Reeves turned back to Daniel, eyes sharp, but no longer dismissive. We'll need to investigate, he said. Immediately. Daniel nodded. You should. Ethan looked at him then, really looked. Seeing the flannel, the limp, the dog, the warning he had crushed under his shoe. Regret didn't ask permission. It collected its due all at once. What the walls hid. Morning crept in, gray and thin. The rain had stopped, leaving Spokane washed and raw. The kind of quiet that followed something breaking in the night. Daniel Hartman stood outside the service corridor with Atlas at heel, red and black flannel visible beneath his jacket. The night had pulled at his left leg, leaving it stiff and sore, but he ignored it. Pain was familiar. What unsettled him was the silence. The hospital felt different now, not calmer, exposed. Yellow tape cut across the service entrance. A temporary fan hummed, venting air out instead of pulling it in. People moved slower, spoke softer, as if the walls themselves were listening. Atlas remained alert, posture disciplined, black harness clean against his fur. Service dog. Do not pet. Read like a statement no one argued with anymore. A woman approached Daniel from the corridor, mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a low ponytail. Face serious, but composed. She wore a navy jacket with a federal seal stitched over the chest. Daniel Hartman, she said, checking a tablet. I'm Special Agent Karen Morales. Her eyes were sharp, observant, the kind that missed nothing and forgot nothing. We need you to walk us through what you noticed yesterday, she said. From the beginning. Daniel nodded. He didn't feel pride, only a steady sense of responsibility settling deeper into his bones. They moved through the corridor together. Agent Morales listened without interrupting as Daniel pointed out the vent intakes, the maintenance access, the place where Atlas had first stopped short. Atlas demonstrated without being asked. He slowed at the same spot, muscles tightening, nose lifting just slightly. Morales watched the dog with interest. That reaction is consistent, she said. Not trained behavior. Instinct. Daniel glanced down at Atlas. He doesn't miss much. Inside a nearby office, Ethan Cole sat hunched over a small conference table. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. His hair was rumpled, his expensive shirt wrinkled beyond saving. His hands shook as he held a paper cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Across from him sat Laura Bennett, the facilities manager. Her posture was rigid, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the tabletop. The efficiency that usually defined her had cracked, revealing fear beneath. Agent Morales stepped in first. Daniel stayed near the door, Atlas seated at his side. Mr. Cole, Morales said evenly. We're conducting a preliminary investigation into a hazardous exposure event. I need you to answer some questions. Ethan nodded too quickly. Of course. Anything. Morales tapped her tablet. Records show a cost reduction directive issued last quarter regarding waste processing protocols. Signed by you. Laura's breath hitched. Ethan swallowed. It was a standard optimization, he said. All within regulatory limits. Morales' gaze didn't waver. Those limits assume full compliance. Yesterday's delivery didn't meet that standard. She slid the tablet across the table. Images filled the screen. The crooked lid. The unsealed container. A timestamp Daniel recognized. Ethan stared at it, then at Daniel. Something flickered there. Recognition. Shame. Fear. You were warned, Morales said quietly. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. He leaned back, pressing a hand to his face. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse. I didn't believe that someone without a title could be right. Morales finished. That happens a lot. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. He didn't want this. Not the collapse. Not the humiliation. He had only wanted them to listen. Laura finally looked up. I filed the concern, she said softly, but I didn't push. Morales nodded. And that's how systems fail. Quietly. A nurse appeared at the door, relief etched into her features. Agent Morales, she said. The infant is stable. Oxygen levels are holding. Ethan sagged, relief tearing through him like a wave. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Daniel looked away, giving him what privacy he could. Outside, the corridor filled with new faces. Inspectors, engineers, men and women with clipboards and measured voices. The machinery of accountability had arrived. Slow, but certain. Morales stepped back into the hallway with Daniel. You did the right thing, she said. Daniel shook his head slightly. I did what I could. She studied him for a moment. Most people don't. Later that morning, Doctor Michael Reeves joined them near the ventilation hub. His expression was grave but focused. We've confirmed chemical residue in the intake filters, he said. Low concentration. Enough to affect a newborn. We're lucky. Daniel felt that word catch. Lucky wasn't what he would have called it. Ethan emerged from the office then, moving like an old man. He stopped a few feet from Daniel, hands clenched at his sides. I owe you an apology, he said. His voice cracked, then steadied. I was wrong. About you. About all of it. Daniel met his gaze. He saw a man stripped of pretense, left with the weight of his choices. Your daughter's alive, Daniel said. That's what matters. Ethan nodded, tears streaking down his face. I could have killed her, he whispered. Daniel didn't answer. Some realizations needed silence to land. As the sun climbed higher, workers began dismantling the faulty equipment. Tape came down. Notes were taken. Names recorded. Atlas finally relaxed, sitting with the easy patience of a job completed. Daniel watched the process unfold, feeling a strange mix of relief and weariness. The system hadn't listened until it had no choice. It never did. He turned to leave, Atlas rising smoothly at his side. Behind him, the hospital stood quieter, stripped of illusion. Some walls didn't protect. They hid. The cost that remains. A pale winter sun rose over Spokane, weak and honest. The streets were dry now, but the cold lingered, the kind that stayed in bones long after the weather changed. Daniel Hartman walked the perimeter one last time, red and black flannel visible beneath his jacket, breath steady in the morning air. Atlas moved at his side with quiet precision, black harness snug against his chest. Service dog. Do not pet. Clear and unignored. Daniel's left leg still carried its familiar stiffness, but today it felt lighter, as if something heavy had finally been set down. The hospital behind them no longer felt untouchable. News traveled fast in places built on reputation. By mid-morning, inspectors had finished their initial work, and the staff moved with a new caution. Conversations lowered when Daniel passed. Eyes followed Atlas with respect instead of irritation. Daniel didn't seek any of it. He had learned long ago that attention was rarely free. Near the private wing entrance, Ethan Cole stood alone. He wore no suit today, just a plain coat, collar turned up against the cold. The sharp edges were gone from him. What remained looked smaller, quieter, and older than his years. Daniel hesitated, then approached. Atlas sat when Daniel stopped, posture relaxed but alert. Ethan turned, His eyes were red-rimmed, but clear. "They're transferring my daughter to another facility," Ethan said. "Just for observation. She's stable. They say she'll be fine." Daniel nodded. "That's good." Silence stretched between them. Not hostile, just heavy. "I lost my job this morning," Ethan said at last. There was no bitterness in his voice, only fact. "Board decision. Immediate." Daniel absorbed that without reaction. Consequences had a way of arriving, whether you commented on them or not. "I signed the directive," Ethan continued. "I told myself it was just numbers. Margins that no one would ever notice." He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers as if testing whether they still worked. "I noticed you yesterday," he said quietly, "but not the way I should have." Daniel felt a familiar urge to deflect, to minimize. He resisted it. "You weren't looking," he said. "That happened." Ethan let out a breath that might have been a laugh on another day. "I spent my life believing authority meant clarity," he said. "Turns out it just meant people stopped arguing with me." Atlas shifted slightly, tail brushing the pavement once. Ethan glanced at the dog, then back at Daniel. "If you hadn't pushed," he said, voice roughening, "my daughter would be dead." Daniel held his gaze. "She isn't." "That's not the same thing," Ethan replied. "I'll live the difference." Daniel nodded once. He understood that kind of weight. Some things stayed with you no matter how well the outcome turned out. A woman approached from the entrance, early 40s, dark hair pulled back, posture straight. She wore a city-issued coat and carried a thin folder under one arm. "Mr. Hartman," she said. "I'm Rachel Owens, City Safety Oversight." Her tone was professional, but respectful. "We're restructuring hospital security protocols, environmental monitoring, independent reporting lines. We'd like your input." Daniel blinked. "My input? You were the only one who spoke up," Rachel said, "and you were right." Daniel felt discomfort twist through him, not fear. Responsibility. "I'm not an administrator," he said. Rachel nodded. "No." She agreed. "You're someone who notices when things don't add up. We need more of that." Daniel looked down at Atlas. The dog met his eyes, steady and trusting. "I'll think about it," Daniel said. Rachel smiled once. "Brief and genuine. That's all I ask." She walked away, leaving Daniel and Ethan in the thin winter sunlight. Ethan cleared his throat. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I wanted you to know I'm grateful." Daniel considered him. The anger he might have felt never came. It had burned out somewhere years ago. "Learn from it," Daniel said. "That's enough." Ethan nodded, tears gathering but not falling. He stepped back, giving space, and for the first time, it felt intentional rather than dismissive. Daniel turned toward the exit, Atlas rising smoothly beside him as they walked away. Daniel felt the strange quiet that followed storms. The world hadn't become fair. Systems hadn't magically learned humility. But one line had been drawn, one lesson paid for in full. Instant regret didn't undo damage. It revealed it. Outside, Daniel paused and looked back at the hospital one last time. Glass still shone. Lights still glowed. But the illusion of invulnerability was gone. He tightened his grip on the leash and started toward the warehouse, Atlas matching his stride. Some costs stayed, and some warnings, once heard, never needed repeating. Sometimes a miracle does not arrive as thunder or light. Sometimes it comes as a quiet warning that asks to be heard. Faith is not only what people pray for in desperate moments. Faith is what they choose when a voice speaks from the margins. When pride says, ignore it. When convenience says, walk away. Maybe God does not always stop the storm. Maybe he sends someone to notice the crack in the wall before it breaks. A man no one listens to. A sign no one wants to read. A moment that asks for humility instead of power. In everyday life, we face the same test. At work, at home, in traffic, in small choices that seem harmless. Who do we dismiss because they look unimportant? What warning do we silence because it slows us down? Grace often shows up early. Regret comes when we refuse to listen. If this story reminded you that every life has value and every voice can matter,
Share it with someone who needs that reminder.
leave a comment and tell us what this story made you reflect on. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice, faith, and quiet courage. May God bless you, guide your steps, and give you the wisdom to listen when it matters most.